Great. So first of all, thank you very much to all of you for being here today, as well to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present. Today, I will present this paper entitled A Place in the Sun, Immigration from Richer Countries and Local Public Finances. So, A Place in the Sun is the name of a TV show that aired in the UK in the year 2000. And the show was mostly about the type of immigrants that I want to talk today. These were usually middle-aged people, so in this case from the UK, looking to buy property in other countries, usually Southern European countries. And the reason you have it on your screen, it's to go to places with attractive amenities such as access to the coast, sunny weather, a nice climate, as well as services and restaurants, cafes, etc., at lower prices. So this is the type of immigrants that I'm gonna look at today. And the motivation to look at this type of migration comes from the following. So immigration flows from wealthier countries to relatively less rich countries have grown rapidly in the past few years due to trends such as population aging and the rise of remote work. Usually these immigrants immigrate to enjoy amenities in their places of destination, as well to arbitrage international price differences. That is, to take profit of the fact that prices are lower in their destination. Now, several national and local governments aim to attract these immigrants by offering attractive visas as well as a preferential tax treatment. However, we don't know much about what their economic and fiscal effects are. And in particular, existing evidence does not examine the local fiscal impact of such immigrants. Current research shows that there's positive economic impacts of both retirees in the case of France, by Padilla and Moraton co-authors, as well as the case of remote workers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, analyzed by you. Now, when it comes to local fiscal impact of immigration, we have evidence from less developed countries. So we have the case of Mariani in Italy, finding mostly positive effects, but then the case of the US, where immigrants from less developed countries, low-skill immigrants, have a negative effect, as documented by Myla. So to bridge this gap in the literature, in this paper, I ask how immigration from wealthier countries impact local public finances by using the case of Spanish municipalities between 2000 and 2016. Now, Spain is an ideal setting for testing this question because, well, first of all, it has attracted a large number of immigrants from higher income countries during my study period, around 500,000. On top of that, Spanish municipalities have fiscal autonomy. That is, they can raise their own revenue. They raise most of their own revenue. They can set tax rates and they can decide on what to spend. They provide key services from which migrants benefit, like social services, infrastructure, promotion of culture, sports, as well as local policy. In order to study this question, I'm going to use a set of unique microdata on both population and local public finances across 592 Spanish municipalities. And given that immigrants tend to locate in places where economic outcomes are usually on better trends, I'm going to use an immigrant networks instrument to reduce selection bias concerns by predicting the number of immigrants that reside in a location according to pre-existing networks, as in CART 2001. In terms of the results, the main result in this paper is that 1 percentage point increase in the local population share of immigrants from higher income countries leads to a 1.6 decrease percent in aggregate revenue and expenditure per capita. And this is driven by two facts. The first is that there's no effect on total aggregate revenue and expenditure. And the second is that there's a population increase of 1.46 percentage points. So that means that for each additional immigrant from a higher income country, there's an additional 0.46 natives locating to that municipality, which we know as native collocation. I'm going to push the idea that the mechanism explaining these results is likely to be seasonality and the tax base. So here by seasonality, I explain it as the fact that many of these immigrants do not reside all year round in Spain. And this is going to have the following effects. So first of all, I'm going to show the first stage that an increase in immigrants from higher income countries increases the number of immigrants the number of people that are non-permanent residents, that is the seasonal patterns of residency. Then I'm going to show that there's an increase in employment, but mostly in low-skilled jobs, in low value-added industries, such as services and hospitality, that will have an effect on the permanent residents, that is the people that work in the municipality and live there all year round, decreasing their income, and hence worsening the local tax base. With these results, I contribute to two main strands of the literature. The first one is the literature on immigration and local public finances, which still is a nascent strand of literature. First of all, I'm going to be looking at a group that has previously not been studied, these wealthier immigrants from higher income countries. And I'm going to be showing a negative impact, at least when it comes to public finances per capita, on their seasonality in residence and consumption. Second, I'm going to argue that these immigrants are mostly affecting the economy through their consumption, so mostly as consumers, as opposed to workers, which is the focus of much of the immigration literature. And what I'm going to show is that, or what I'm going to propose to literature is that increased consumption does not necessarily have positive economic effects. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's the paper. Now let's dig deeper and go more in detail. So first of all, who are these immigrants from higher income countries? As I hinted in the introduction, the top 3 countries of origin include the UK, as well as Germany and France, as well as other EU countries, richer EU countries. The main reason of immigration are amenities. So here I'm going to be using survey data for immigrants arrived between 1998 and 2007. So this was the period where most of the immigration inflow actually took place. And here in the first column, I have immigrants from higher income countries, in the second, lower income countries. So in the first panel, I have work-related reasons like better employment opportunities, lack of employment in origin, or job posting. And immigrants from higher income countries, only 21% of them cite any of these reasons, while immigrants from lower income countries, 68% cite some of these reasons. So you can see that there's a big disparity. Then, when we turn to leisure-related reasons like retirement, cost of living, or the climate, we see that 64% of immigrants from higher income countries cite at least one of these reasons, while for immigrants from lower income countries, only 19% of them. So as you can tell, this is also gonna influence where these people locate. So what I show here in the left figure is the location choices of immigrants from higher income countries. And as you can see, most of them seem to locate disproportionately in the Mediterranean coast, places like Malaga, Alicante, and the Balearic Islands. While for immigrants from lower income countries, we see that they locate mostly in Madrid, as well as Barcelona and the Basque Country. This will also have an effect on the type of immigrants that come from each of these two origins. So comparing immigrants from higher income countries vis-a-vis immigrants from lower income countries, we see that they are much older on average. They are half as likely to be employed. And in this survey, we cannot even tell if they are employed in Spain or elsewhere. Okay, so this might contribute to their seasonal patterns of residency that I will talk more in depth later. The monthly earnings, if employed, are also 50% higher. Occupational skill, which is a measure of skill in the jobs that they have, which goes from 1 being the highest skill to 13 being the lowest, is also indicating a higher skill component in the jobs that they work in. They are much less likely to send remittances. More than 1/3 of them are retired. And for lower income country migrants, the number is much smaller. And they tend to own their house, either outright or with a mortgage. So 17% out of these 57% have a mortgage, while the rest rent. This pattern is completely different when we look at immigrants from lower income countries. So as you can see, these immigrants are very different from the immigrants that we usually might think or even study in the economics literature or in the migration literature more specifically. And in order to see their impact on local public finances, I'm going to use the following institutional context. So my sample is 592 municipalities above 10,000 people. This is around 75% of the total population. Now I take this sample because of data constraints that I'm going to show in the next slide. And in order to understand a little bit more what these municipalities that are going to be taking these migrants do, so first of all, they raise revenues. Okay. So revenues can come from different sources. I group them in the following way. So we have recurrent sources. So that include property taxes, vehicle taxes, as well as recurring service fees, such as fees for the use of water or electricity. Property taxes are going to be the main source of revenue. This accounts for around 27%. Then we have non-recurrent sources. So these can be thought as one-off payments for the use of public services and goods as well. So these are the service fees, as well as indirect taxes on consumption. So these non-recurrent sources are paid both by individuals but businesses. This is going to be important for the discussion of the mechanisms. Then we have local income taxes that include both corporate taxes, but also personal income taxes that are paid to the central government by people. But then some of these taxes are devolved to some of the largest municipalities. Overall, local income taxes represent only like 2% of total revenues. And finally, we have external sources of funding. So here we're going to have intergovernmental transfers from other levels of government, as well as borrowing, that is just incurring in debt. Then municipalities in Spain, but this also happens in many other contexts, follow a balanced Bosch requirement. That is that the amount of money that they obtain from their revenues determines quite closely how much they can spend on. And in particular, I group spending into categories. One is discretionary. So here the examples will be social services, local development, police. So this discretionary spending means that it can change more from year to year. So municipalities have more discretion on how much to allocate to these items. And then we have non-discretionary spending. So these are the items that across each year they have to still invest similar amounts. So this includes health and education, which are shared with other levels of government. And most importantly, the main one here is urban infrastructure. So the data that I'm going to be using is, first of all, local public finances budget settlement. So this is very detailed administrative data on all municipalities of Spain above 5,000 inhabitants. And it includes a very detailed breakdown of both revenue and expenditure items. The second is the population registry, which in Spanish is called the Padrón Continuo. And this includes information on all people residing in Spain at the beginning of each year. I can only observe municipalities that have more than 10,000 people. So that's why my sample includes only 592 municipalities above that threshold. And it identifies both, well, native, but also immigrants quite well, because immigrants upon arrival have big incentive to register in order to access public services like healthcare, education, and other public services. I will be complementing this data with the data from the National Immigrant Survey, which is the data that I just used to describe immigrants from higher income countries. I'm going to be using the censuses between 1991 and 2021 to perform both pre-trend analysis, but also to explore the mechanisms. And finally, to explore also part of the mechanisms and alternative explanations, I'm going to be using data on local taxes, voting patterns, and local income.
Can I just ask a quick clarification?
Yes.
So when you're talking about like seasonal immigrant workers and you're also talking about taxes, are there requirements of like are these immigrants permanent residents? Have they fully moved? So when you describe them as seasonal, do they still pay all of the taxes, or are there requirements about you have to live here for like 180 days of the year or something, and then you get taxed? Are there double taxes? How do we characterize the seasonality of workers with the the tax regulations?
So one of the main defining characteristics is that these people are less likely to work. So usually what happens is that they either work elsewhere. So basically a person from the UK that works in the UK but spends, let's say, 3 months in Spain in the summer. So that could be an example. Or they just don't work at all, like retirees. What I'm going to show when I look at the labor market effects is that these inflows of immigrants from higher income countries actually are not associated with increases in the employment share of immigrants from higher income countries. So that's going to be supporting evidence that a lot of these immigrants don't work locally, and hence they don't pay taxes or personal income taxes locally. Does that respond to the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we have the empirical strategy. So the model that I'm going to be using for most of the analysis is going to be regressing log changes in outcomes in municipality C in year T, denoted by Y, on changes in the number of immigrants, the stock of immigrants from higher income countries in municipality C and year T, normalized by the population in the municipality in year T minus 4. Additionally, I'm going to control for the increase in the number of immigrants from lower income countries. And on top of that, I'm going to add period fixed effects that are going to capture factors affecting all the municipalities the same within each time period, as well as comunidad autónoma fixed effects. So comunidad autónoma in Spanish are the regions, and each region has a regional government which have um, a reasonable amount of power in setting policies that affect all municipalities within each of the regions. So in order to take that into account, I include these fixed effects. And the variation that I'm going to be using is 4-year differences across municipalities from 2000 to 2016. So I'm going to be using variation from 2000 to 2004, 2004 to 2008, and so on and so forth. Now, as I hinted in the introduction, the location choices of immigrants might be correlated with outcomes in economic trends at the local level. So basically, there's a potential of omitted variable bias affecting the estimates beta. So in order to circumvent and reduce the omitted variable bias arising from this, I'm going to use an instrumental variable exploiting networks of immigrants in 1996, as in CAR 2001. So the construction of this instrumental variable is as follows. So this is the definition, is the change in predicted immigration, which I construct as follows. So first, for each country of origin O, I'm going to calculate the share of immigrants from that country that live in CTC out of the total number of immigrants from that country of origin O in 1996. Then I'm going to multiply this by the concurrent change in the number of immigrants from that country between years T and T minus 4. So the idea here is that I'm going to predict how many of the immigrants entering during the study period, in each observation, are going to be allocated to each city according to the shares in 1996. So to put an example, you might have that in Alicante in 1996, there might be 4% of the total number of people in the UK in Spain. So what I'm going to do is, for instance, from 2004 to 2008, if 100,000 people from the UK enter Spain, what this share is going to do is going to allocate 4% to Alicante. And that's going to be explained by the pre-existing distribution of immigrants in Alicante rather than by current events or evolution of economic outcomes in Alicante. Finally, I'm going to normalize this by the predicted number of immigrants in each city at baseline, as well as the number of natives in each city as baseline as well. Now, for the validity of this strategy, first of all, I show that the IV is relevant with the first stage of 98. And here I also wanted to show what is the identifying variation. So these are first stage plots of the explanatory variable, the endogenous explanatory variable on the instrument, netting out all the other covariates and fixed effects. So the idea here is that this shows the residual identifying variation that is used to construct the first stage. And as you can see, there's still a substantial amount of residual variation in order to identify a causal effect. And for completeness, I show the same for lower income countries. Now, in terms of the identification assumption, the assumption here is going to be that this predicted immigrant shock must be orthogonal to omitted variables that might impact city outcomes. So mathematically, it looks like this equation here. And in order to provide support for this assumption, I first of all embrace identification using exogeneity of the shares, as in Goldsmith and Pinkham 2020, in contrast to exogeneity of the shocks, as Burosiak and co-authors 2022. I'm going to show that I show in the paper that there's a lack of pretrends in K economic outcomes, that the results remain robust using alternative specifications, and that controlling for serial correlation using the multiple instrumentation procedure proposed by Jagger and co-authors does not alter the results. So now let's jump directly into the main results. So here I'm gonna show the log per capita revenue, the change in log per capita revenue, as well as the change in log per capita expenditure, and then the change in total quantities, change in log revenue and change in log expenditure. Finally, as an auxiliary outcome, I'm going to use the change in the number of natives over baseline population. And in panel A, I show the OLS estimates, and in panel B, I show the two-stage least squares. So first of all, what you can see is that comparing these first four columns, the effect of immigration from higher income countries with respect to the OLS, you can see that there seems to be a positive bias in the OLS estimates, which is justified by this fact that immigrants tend to locate to cities performing better. So I'm going to focus on the two-stage least squares now onwards. So first, what we see is that there's a negative effect in log per capita, well, in per capita revenue and expenditure. In particular, a 1 percentage point increase in the local share of immigrants from higher income countries is associated with a 1.6% decrease in per capita revenue and expenditure. Then we also see no effect for immigrants from lower income countries. And finally, what it seems that explains this decrease in per capita revenue and expenditure is a decrease in both revenues and expenditures that is actually null. So there's no effect here, or no statistically significant effect. And at the same time, there's a statistically significant effect on the collocation by natives. So the way to read this coefficient is that for each additional immigrant from a higher income country, there's 0.46 natives located into that municipality. So one might expect that by increasing immigrant population, especially from higher income countries, local public finances will expand. However, we don't see this. We see that local public finances don't seem to expand in terms of revenues and expenditures, despite increasing total population. Now, in order to understand what is actually driving this and going deeper, I'm going to look at different items of revenue and expenditure more closely. So first of all, I look at different items of municipal revenue. And here what we see is that by separating by recurring, non-recurring, income taxes, and transfers and borrowing, what we have is that the largest effect in per capita terms is in non-recurring revenues. Okay,
Sorry,
so
Gabriel,
yes,
can I interrupt you a second?
go ahead.
So in the previous table, probably you explained
Sorry.
it before, sorry if I didn't catch it, but what was the normalization for the per capita variables? Like, what are you using there to normalize in the denominator? Is
Just
the population
population.
like fixed at 1 year, or is like the evolution of the
No,
population?
it's evolution. If I fix it 1 year, by
It will
using
go
the
up,
log
no?
difference, it will cancel out and it will be this one.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thanks. Amazing.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, it's per capita in each year. Okay, so here what we see is that the biggest decrease in terms of per capita revenues come from non-recurring revenues. Remember, these are fees used for one-off fees paid for the use of public services and goods. So here you could think parking fees. You have to park your car somewhere, you have to pay a fee. If you are a business and you want to put a terrace for your restaurant, you also have to pay a fee to have your terrace. You want to make some renovations in your house or in your business establishment, you also have to pay a fee, and there's many others like this. Now, what we see is that in terms of the share, so remember, what we have is no effect on total revenue, okay? But we see some changes in the share of revenue. So there's some compositional changes going on. In particular, the weight of non-recurring fees, non-recurring revenues decreases, while the weight of recurring revenue seems to increase. So here, it seems that this is not driven purely, but by a mechanical effect that population increases and this decreases income from all sources equally. But instead, there seems to be some behavioral channel whereby non-recurring fees are reduced disproportionately more than other sources of revenue. And in this case, what we have is that recurring revenues gain a larger weight, which I'm going to come back to after. When it comes to expenditure items, a similar story goes on. So many items such as social expenditure, local development, expenditure in police and in debt repayment, see their per capita expenditure decrease. Okay. Now, when it comes in terms of composition of municipal expenditure, the item that seems to decrease the most is debt. So a decrease in debt here, or at least the share of municipal expenditure allocated to debt repayments decreasing, can be explained by either refinancing. So these municipalities have some outstanding debts with some institutions and they refinance them to pay it over longer time horizons. That could be one explanation. Another could be that there's a decrease in investment. So when municipalities want to invest, they might finance that using debt. And by reducing the number of investments and the number of debt that they take, debt repayments might also decrease. Now, what we see is that a non-discretionary category, which is urbanism, increases its share, which makes sense because we expect the non-discretionary categories, that is the categories of expenditure that municipalities need to spend on each year, to not change that much. So here we see this small change in expenditures due to this increase in immigration. So what I'm going to propose that rationalizes these results. So the mechanism, as I said in the introduction, is going to be that many of such immigrants do not reside all year round. So if many of these immigrants do not reside all year round, what's going to happen is that this is going to limit their contribution to local consumption just because they're going to spend less time there. On top of that, apart from this more direct effect, I argue that there's also an indirect effect whereby seasonal patterns of consumption are gonna shift local demand to certain industries such as hospitality and services, which create mostly low-skilled jobs. And these low-skilled jobs provide worse employment opportunities for permanent residents, and this will affect the local tax base, making them contribute less to the local economy. So that's the idea behind the mechanism. And in order to provide evidence in favor of this mechanism, I'll first show that inflows of immigrants from higher income countries are associated with an increase in the number of non-permanent residents. I'm going to be using different proxies of non-permanent residents from the census and other data sets to convince you of this. Then I will show using decadal differences in the census that there's a change in the composition of the workforce towards more low-skilled jobs. These low-skilled jobs will be concentrated in hospitality and services and in detriment of construction sector. And finally, I'm going to also provide evidence that this worsens the local tax base, especially amongst permanent residents.
Hey,
to show,
just a quick question.
Yeah.
This is coming from the chat.
Yeah.
Do the population numbers recorded at the start of the year or the numbers that you've been using reflect the immigrants who are there seasonally and probably just there over the summer?
So ideally, when you buy a house in Spain, you want to register there even if you don't spend there all year round. So you have access to public services. So my data registers people living there at the beginning of the year, but I highly doubt that they will register if they don't spend all year round. Okay, so to continue, first of all here, so in the first 4 columns, here what I'm doing is OLS regressions, okay? This is the only part of the paper that I use OLS and not IB. Okay, and here I just look at the increase in immigrants along my study period, that's from 2000 to 2016, on cross-sectional measures in the years specified in each one of these measures. Okay, so these are associations, okay? These don't reflect necessarily causation. But what I find here is that this increase in the number of immigrants during the study period is correlated positively with the number of homes that use electricity sporadically in the 2021 census. It's also very correlated with the number of second homes in the 2021 census. Then using the INE tourism survey, that's the Spanish Statistical Agency tourism survey, the number of tourist dwellings in 2021 is also positively associated. So many of these immigrants might not actually own a house. They might spend a large amount of time renting a place, let's say 6 months, for instance. So this is another possible indication. Then in the 2011 census, we have this measure of when people live abroad, so whether you spend nights abroad of your house. And for immigrants from higher income countries, there's also a positive association. So here the idea is that spending more time abroad is an indicator that you're not living there all year round. And finally, in the 2011 and 2021 censuses, we have this measure of whether a person works or not, as well as the country of origin. So here I can calculate how many immigrants from higher income countries do not work. And this is the share of our total population, as well as all the others. And we see also a positive association. So not working at the same time allows these people to have less attachment to the municipality and possibly be elsewhere. So all these proxies suggest that the number of non-permanent residents increases due to this increase in the number of immigrants from higher income countries. Here, I use decadal changes from the census from the years 2001, 2011, and 2021 to look at employment composition. So first of all, what I see is an increase in employment. And this increase in employment, by looking at the second and third column, we see that it's driven mostly by low-skill employment. Then in the fourth and fifth column, in the fourth column, I look at the change in the number of immigrants from high-income countries that are employed in the municipality. Their change normalized by baseline employment, and we see no change, which is consistent, and it relates to the previous question that was asked, that a lot of these immigrants really do not work locally. Their main role is consumers, and this also helps us validate or at least provide more evidence to the fact that they might not spend there all year round. Then in the fifth and sixth columns, what I show is that there's inflows of mostly low-skill employees from other municipalities into the municipality as the number of immigrants from higher income countries grow. And finally, all of this together just makes the share of employees in the municipality that are low skill increase. Now, what we see is that there's an increase in the number of low-skilled workers, but this does not necessarily tell us whether those skilled workers work in higher or lower value-added industries, which are going to have a direct effect on public finances, especially revenue that depends on the type of businesses and the type of workers that there's in the municipality. So here, what I do is I look at the the change in industry composition. Okay, so in the first column, I look at tradables because in the literature, there's this discussion that the tradable sector might be affected disproportionately. I don't see this in this paper because what I see is that there's an increase in the share of people working in hospitality and other services, which comes at the expense of the construction sector. Now, in the case of Spain, and especially during the years 2000 to 2008, construction suffered from a very large bubble in which a lot of credit was injected. And construction was indeed a high value activity in the sense that workers that work in construction, but especially business owners in construction, obtain very large returns from participating in this industry. And here what we see is that in these municipalities, we have less people working in this due to the bubble high value added industry and more in hospitality and other services. Finally, all of this takes us to the impact on the local tax base, the impact on the people residing in the municipality. So here I have data for personal income tax returns that are made to the central administration, to the central government, but grouped by where the people reside, so by municipality. So here I can understand how the local tax base, in terms of the income of the population, reacts. So in the first column, what I see is the log change in average income amongst tax filers, and here we see a negative effect. If we divide instead of this average income by tax filers by population, we see an even more negative effect. Remember, we see this increase in the population. So if we take the denominator and make it even higher, the result is that the effect is going to be even more negative. Log total income, despite increasing population and increasing number of workers, stays the same. Okay, and this is directly associated with the lack of change that we see in the total number of revenues. Okay. And finally, I show the change in the number of tax filers. So this is related to the increase in employment. We see an increase in the number of tax filers just because there's more workers. But since we have an increase in both workers and the population, if we look at the change in the number of tax filers over the population, so that's kind of like the share of tax filers, we see no change. Okay, so what all of this takes us is to the point that it seems that these seasonal patterns of residents seem to plausibly explain why high income migrants do not boost local public finances. It's basically because we have an increase in employment, we have a decrease in average income, and hence some of the revenues that depend more intensively in this average income, such as non-recurrent revenues, which are tied to economic activity through the payments of both businesses and people to local public goods, seem to not react. And this is a double whammy in the sense that it's not only this effect driven by the seasonal patterns of demand, but also since many of these immigrants don't stay all year round, their contribution is diminished. Finally, in the paper, I look at other explanations that are unlikely to explain the results. So first, you might argue that this increase in immigrants might change the type of government and the priorities that they have in terms of spending. I find a small impact on local voting outcomes and mostly decreasing the share of right-wing vote for right-wing parties, which, if anything, you will expect that if right-wing parties are in power, they are the ones that might be cutting more of the services. So it seems that it doesn't fully square out. Another way that you could have no impact on revenues due to increased population is because tax rates are lower. I see no impact on tax rates at all. And finally, tourism. So this is a little bit more tricky. So the idea here is that tourism might be positively associated with the number of higher income country migrants, but also with local outcomes. So if it's positive related with both, we know by omitted variable bias theory that the bias should be positive, okay? So if the bias exists and it's positive, what this implies is that my results, if anything, should be more negative if the bias exists. So that will not necessarily contradict the conclusions of this paper. Now, there's papers that show that there's not much economic impact of tourism on local employment and other related outcomes. There's a recent paper by Gonzalez and Surovtseva at the Journal of Human Resources. So maybe this bias is not even there. Okay, so to conclude, I find that immigration from higher income countries reduces per capita expenditures and revenues of municipalities, although it does not affect total expenditures or revenues. I propose that the mechanism is a limited impact of higher income countries' immigrant demand due to their seasonal patterns of residence. So that's the direct impact, and then an indirect impact operating through the effect on the local permanent population and hence the local tax base. And finally, the policy implications are multiple. So for instance, one place-based policy that could be implemented by the central government is to promote economic activity across the year. Another will be to try to make these immigrants stay in the municipality more time of the year or all year round. Okay, so that's all. Thank you very much. Here is my email. And finally, I also want to say that this is not my job market paper, but I'm in the job market. My job market paper is in my website. And if you want to talk about this or any other of my research or just anything, just please feel free to drop me an email. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was excellent. Now we're going to have our discussion. So we're going to start with our discussant speaking. So that's you, Paul. And then after that, we can open the floor to anyone else who has follow-ups. So we'll start with the discussion for 10 minutes. And then Gabriel will give you a moment to respond to whichever comments you want. And then after that, we'll open the floor. So thank you.
Then should I start, no?
Yes,
Okay.
thanks.
Well, first of all, Gabriel, was a really good paper. It was really nice to read it, and I mean exciting to see all all these different robust tests that you did and all that. So overall, it's a great paper, no? So now I will focus on the comments because we have no too much time. So first, I think we should emphasize in the summary on the abstract that is the short-term effects, because even though you are measuring 4 years change, you are measuring this impact of 2008 to 2010 migration shock into 2010 local budget, no? And then maybe the impact in the long term could be different. So, but anyways, your paper is adding value to the discussion, but you should mention briefly somewhere that is a short-term effect. So it will be just that, no? And for me, it's quite noisy because of this short-term effect to go into the per capita terms. So I think the results are of high value, just mentioning that there is not an impact in the local revenue, in the total revenue, and in the total expenditure. So saying so is already a contribution, no? So of course, what I mean is not focusing only in the total revenue, but uh, uh, not diminishing that much, because I think you are under giving little relevance to this finding, and then highlighting the per capita, and then you mentioned that quite of the effect is mechanical, no? Because maybe the impact is not yet there, and we are just summarizing, dividing for a larger number, no? So they are not spending less in policemen. They are just spending the same, but there is more people registered living. But as you say, they are not always there, no? They are seasonal, most of them, no? So I will just give more balance between both data, between both findings, and I found it really interesting that there is no impact in the total revenue and expenditure. Then in your model, you have year fixed effects and comunidad autónoma fixed effects. I will say that the reasoning for comunidad autónoma fixed effects is because of they are the ones making more policy changes, and it is changing over time. And then I will go for, at least in the robustness check, I will go for a comunidad autónoma year fixed effects. At least in the robustness check, it could be, I think it will not change much of your results, but it will say yes, because especially in this period, you have like 3 national government changes from the PP to socialist to PP, and then I guess several comunidad autónomas changed government also and policy. I don't know, no, but I think it will be better to control for that, at least as a robustness. And I as a development economist, I was really excited about the inclusion as a control, and also with the chief chair instrumental variable, the low income countries. And then I think, even though it's not your focus, it's not a research gap you are trying to cover, but it is a contribution to the discussion, because I think you mentioned MAIDA, and then MAIDA found that there was a negative effect. And then your contribution from this paper to this other literature, which is not your focus, but you are contributing to that with a strong finding, you should highlight a little bit. You mentioned that yes, low-income countries migrants do not impact in the short term of the local budget, and I think it's not the main thing of your paper, but it is a contribution. Um, for me, it's noisy that you are imputing the 2000 fiscal data with the 2002. So I will try to look for a way to avoid it. You prove later that it's not a problem because you used other years, etc., and it wasn't a problem. But imputing this is quite noisy for me, no? And I guess maybe, I don't know if you already published it, but maybe some reviewers could be aware, no? I have a question about the T-4 is in your main specification. Is it the first year of the new local government compared to the first years of the previous local government, or because it depends, no? So I think it could be more interesting to see maybe the second year of the new government, because they already did the budget. Maybe the first year, if it is the first year, they are working with the budget prepared by the previous administration, no? So maybe think about it and you could find a better adjustment, no? But even though I saw that you did with different years, starting in 2000, 2001, 2002, and there's no change. So, but I just wanted to know that, no? And you defined high-income countries as those richer than Spain, no? And that for me, that I could be it could be interesting robustness check, at least if you compare high income countries, no matter if they are richer than Spain or not. For example, Portugal, Greece, they have rich people also coming to, or I don't know, rich people from Uruguay or rich people from other high income countries like Chile. Then they are already here, and then you are considering them as a low income country. So I will try a different definition of high income country, not as richer or poorer to Spain, but like World Bank definition, no? But I think this is just an additional line in your robustness checks explanation, no? You mentioned that you are not using 10,000 below 10,000 population because of the code. And I think I was thinking maybe you could somehow create these codes and then incorporate them. But of course, for other source, I know you cannot use those below 5,000. So you could increase your data set, because as you mentioned, you are losing 25 of the Spanish population, no? So maybe you can reduce this 25% by doing this, no? Like, I don't know if it is possible to create a code for the municipalities, depending on your data set, but it could be interesting to add this data to the thing, no? You at the beginning of the paper, you are not mentioning the other things of how high-income countries, migrants has been studied. For example, the impact of unemployment on poverty. I don't know if there is, in the presentation you mentioned something, I think, but it could be nice to see, like, to highlight your gap, mentioning that these other things like unemployment and poverty has already been studied. That's why we are focusing on the fiscal part of the municipalities, no? And I got excited because, okay, if this is not has not been studied, it will be really a good follow up for your paper to measure the impact of unemployment, because you measure employment shares, but not necessarily unemployment of the municipality level. And then it could be nice to see the impact of these migrants on total unemployment, no? In the municipality. Somewhere you mentioned like the chief in revenue as a causal, is a causal link to the chief of expenditures. I don't know if not really. So you can imagine, of course, they are more flexibility, but you are not proving causality, no? Your argument is quite, I mean, we can trust that it's true. We can believe that it's true, but you are not proving causality there, no? So trying to solve this language there, but it's just a minor thing. And one thing that was confusing was, for example, you mentioned that jobs in construction goes down, but spending in infrastructure and maintenance goes up. So maybe that's it, that's what you found. So maybe you can find an argument to explain why this is happening at the same time. And you avoid sometimes because of the role of the low income country migrants. Native people if following high income migrants, but I guess also low income country migrants are following because services, at least in Spain and mostly in Europe, are 99% provided by low income migrants. So here in Spain, I am in southern Spain now, everything, every person working in services, especially in the bar, in this kind of things, as a waitress, all of them are from low income countries. So this relation with low income countries migrants, you didn't mention it, how could impact. Of course, you are using both variables, so it's complicated, but maybe they are driving this tax per capita reduction, no? Because I don't know if there is a bigger tax evasion. So I talk too much. I hope some of this is relevant for your research, Gabriel, which is a very good research. I was so happy reading it. So now we can
Great.
go to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Those are really useful and interesting comments. Gabriel, if you want to like respond, you obviously can't respond to all of them, but if there's one or two that you'd like to engage with, you're welcome to do so, and then we can open up some more discussion.
You are mute.
Thank you. Sorry, I started talking. Okay. So I really like your last point because my job market paper hinges a lot on that. So I'm gonna think how I can think about this informality phenomenon in this setting, because you're right. I think that's gonna matter. Okay, so one of the things that I struggle most during this paper or writing it is this whole per capita or total revenue. I guess that it depends on what you value. In many settings, we care about the total provision of public services. In other, we care about the public service provision per capita or for certain groups. So I'm going to think more about it, and I think we can discuss further, maybe later or by email, because I would really much appreciate how it comes from the point of view of the reader or the person that is seeing the presentation. Especially because I want to make the point that while there's going to be a part that is mechanical, I also want to show, and I think my results point towards part that is behavioral. There's some economic changes. So it's not all just a statistical construct in a sense. What else? What other comment I like? So this T minus 4, this is the first year ruling. Elections are 1 year prior. So I was not sure which was the best year to put or whether to use other differences. 4 year differences made sense because that's the duration of the terms. And in terms of the source of the immigrants, especially for lower income countries, changed quite substantially across time. So it helps that the results are not driven by serial correlation. But I hope the robustness checks in which I changed the year in which I begin the data help. Also for the issue of the imputation, I hope that I still convince you that by the robustness check, it seems to not drive the results too much, even if I drop it. So hopefully that's convincing enough. And then I think also it's very interesting, the point that you mentioned about the World Bank definition, that there's many countries that send people, that have people migrating to Spain, but they are the richest. So one that I included at the beginning, especially given my experience in the Costa Brava, where there's a lot of very, very rich people from Russia. So first I was including Russia, but then I was like, maybe this is not consistent. It didn't change the results, but I think it will be relevant to look at countries of origin and see if there's some lower income country that disproportionately sends rich people, because it will help make the story. So I really like that comment. And then I have comments, well, I have ideas and comments from all of your other very relevant contributions to the discussion. But I think that for the interest of time, I might allow also other people to make comments and questions, and we can talk. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. If any of the attendees have any questions, you can raise your hand and I'll move you over. I had one comment slash question, which is just that I think your use of the IV is really interesting. I've not really seen it used in this context of focusing just on immigrants from high income countries, because normally we think about like using networks as useful for people who are immigrating due to employment opportunities, and it helps a lot to migrate to the location where you might have a network, because immigrants would select to go there to get some assistance with integrating and employment help. So I wonder if there's some like further work you can do with this contribution about why your instrument is so strong in the first place. Like if there are any theoretical reasons why high income immigrants from high income countries would want to migrate to areas in which other immigrants from their country went to before. Like I wonder if there's some preference-based factors that maybe these immigrants want some similarities with other cultural components or something like that. So I think that's pretty interesting, and perhaps there's a way you could make that contribution as well.
Well, I didn't think much about whether it was a larger contribution or whether I could make a contribution through that way. The way I was thinking about it is that migrant networks seem to matter a lot for workers, as we've seen in many of the papers in the last 20 years, starting with CART and co-authors. Now, it matters a lot for workers to find jobs through networks, but also because people want to be close to other friends or people from their country of origin. And I think that logic translates as well for people from high-income countries, even if they are retirees. So some of these comes from the fact that my experience in Spain, right? So seeing communities of immigrants from other countries of origin. And I will say that people that come to work, usually they assimilate better in terms of, let's say, language. And while people that come from richer countries usually are not known to assimilate that much in terms of language. And part of it is because they also keep close-knit communities with people from their country of origin. So you could think there's another TV show. So today I'm talking about TV shows. There's this one called Benidorm. So it's a bunch of British immigrants living in Alicante. So that reflects the fact that, you know, in real life, there's a big community of British people there. You have a big community of people from Germany in the Canary Islands, Russians in the Costa Brava, where I'm from. So I think that there's still very relevant, you know, networks that matter not only for work, but just because people want to be close to their friends.
Yeah.
And if you're rich, you can spend more time. I don't know
Yeah,
if
no,
that's...
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought my prior would be that if most of these from your descriptive statistics were like people who were retired and were choosing, like I would think that location would matter more, just in terms of like having a beachfront property um or I don't know, being in a specific city that they just like the geography. So I didn't think too much about people choosing where to migrate based on potential networks and historical links. I would think that if you're rich enough, maybe you're just choosing the best location where you can, you know, have the property that you want. So that's why I thought it was just interesting.
I'll dig deeper into it also because it's arguably more exogenous than potentially networks for workers, because workers at the end of the day, they also have the consideration of going to a place where there's jobs for them. But that remains to be explored. Maybe I'm wrong. So Thank you. I think that's very interesting to dig deeper.
Are there any other comments? And I guess maybe we can close and introduce the next week's seminar or 2 weeks from now seminar.